Hello there, welcome to the tutorial on synthesis grids. Um, I guess first of all I should tell you that you should find a copy of a synthesis grid, a blank synthesis grid form in this week's module. It'll be included in the folder along with the instructions and the other materials you'll need for this week. Um, a synthesis grid is basically it's a tool. It's a visual organization strategy. You may be familiar with other visual organization strategies like webbing or clustering, and this is like that. Except what this does is I think, organizes the task of what you need to be doing, not just in the first paper, but really in all of the papers you're going to write for this course. Um, this course emphasizes drawing connections between multiple texts. And so one way that you can do that is to think about, um, not think about moving from text to text as you're discussing uh, whatever topic you're discussing, but to think about moving from idea to idea and thinking about how different sources respond to different ideas. So you'll see that the synthesis grid is organized in this way. In the left-hand column, you have themes, and then going across horizontally, you have sources. And so this synthesis grid has been partly filled out. Um, and it includes themes that are related to my definition of disability. So let's say I have come up with a definition of disability that is something like disability involves some sort of limitation. It is integral to a person's identity. Uh, and maybe I decide that it can be the basis for a culture. Maybe that would be my third theme. So I would write involves limitation, is integral to an individual's identity, and down here for theme 3, I might type in can be the basis for a culture. I can't do that because I'm stuck in protected view. But anyway, I could do that. Um, you'll notice that then going across, what I've done is looked for things that in the sources, the way a particular source has responded to this theme. So when I looked at the Longmore reading, um, I felt like he, in talking about limitation, talked about the need for access to public places. I honed in on the fact that he identified society as the limitation. I also focused on the fact that he mentions that the medical model of disability corrects and cures, but doesn't address the social aspects that limit a person. I referred to his part where he talks about the way that insurance companies promote invalidism by only funding treatment and not access. When I looked at Shakespeare, I looked at limitation in a slightly different way. I looked at impairment posing a physical limitation, and I talked about his concept of barrier-free utopia. Um, when I was working here with theme 2, I was thinking about the way that disability is integral to an individual's identity. I focused on disability pride and disability communities as they're discussed in Longmore and how they reject the medical model's assumption of incapability. Um, I also, in Shakespeare, I looked at the Zola quotation where it discusses the fact that disability is a universal human experience, that it's really part of everybody's identity, and our impairments make us who we are. And I also looked at the psychological value of the social model. He talks about the fact that disability is a source of community and self-esteem. And likewise, if I was going to include a third source, there are a number of sources that I could incorporate here. For example, um, if I wanted to look at maybe Strauss's autism as culture, I might talk about the way that autistic traits can be perceived as a limitation because of the degree to which they exist relative to neurotypical people. If I wanted to talk about the way that it's integral to an individual's identity, I could pick up on his identification of features of autism culture and different traits that he identifies as being not negative or not symptoms at all, but in fact just elements of a specific social group. So there are different ways I could do that. So how do you begin to use this? Well, I think there are a couple of ways. Um, Firstly, I'd like you to just think of it as a thinking tool. This gets you thinking about the areas you're going to discuss in your paper, as well as possible intersections between sources and connections between sources. Not just what does Longmore say about limitation, but what does Shakespeare say about limitation that relates to what Longmore says? Are there connections we can draw in between these? Perhaps at some point, you may find that you can use this as the basis for the organization of your paper. And I would suggest if you're going to do that, move this way, right? Move across. Don't try to go source by source. You don't want your papers ever to become just a review of literature. And you don't ever want to make this move where you say, this source says this, and this source says this, and this source says this. Move on to the next idea. This source says this source says this source says this. You're not reporting what sources say, but instead you're really fostering a conversation. So the bulk of your emphasis should be on the representation of limitation, and you'll be saying something about limitation and introducing Longmore and introducing Shakespeare and introducing another source perhaps as support for that development of that facet of your thesis. And then you would move on to the secondary idea that even though it's limitation, that limitation can be integral to the creation of identity, and move this way, and so on. So what I'd like you to do this week is to use the synthesis grid collaboratively with your group mates in order to develop points of connection between the readings and to try to identify some common features of disability. As you know, at this point, the first paper asks you to write a definition of disability. Your thesis is answering the question, what is disability? So what you're looking for are really the things that for you are key to what it means to be disabled, or what it means to have a disability. What is it? And you'll be looking for how different sources help you see those features as being essential to disability. This paper is not just your opinion of what you think disability is, but it really is meant to be a synthesis of the readings. When you look at all these texts, what do they say disability is? What is the definition of the concept that emerges out of them for you? And this tool, the synthesis grid, I think, will help you identify those points of connection.